Most IT leaders are pretty good at interviews. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, they're often a solid 6 or a 7. But here's the problem. Good enough does not cut it in highly competitive job markets because it's a game where only one person wins and everybody else is left behind. So when a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 candidate walks into the room, and this is the rating that we are talking about in terms of their interview skills, the 7 on 10 candidate gets knocked down every single time. So being good enough might keep you in the game, but you'll never win. So to secure a top tier role, you need to be exceptional. Another argument a lot of leaders make for lack of practice in interviews, and they realize it later in the game, is like, oh, I'll let my work speak for itself. The problem with that is, like, all things being equal, everybody's work speaking for itself. The hiring panel can only assess you in narrow window of opportunity and with your face time, and that is largely through how you come across in that interview. So in this video, we'll break down how to transform from being a good candidate to a 10 on 10 candidate, specifically by crafting witty and sharp interview responses. And yes, we'll dive into tactical steps to help you get there. So first things first, understand the question behind the question. Every question an interview asks had a purpose. So unless they're wasting everyone's time or they don't know how to hire properly or interview properly, in either case, you should probably run. Every question that they ask has a reason behind it. To craft a sharp and witty response, you first need to understand what's the question behind the question. So ask yourself this, like, why are they asking this? What's the requirement? What requirement does it translate into their organization? What skill or character trait are they trying to assess through your response? Now, by understanding the why behind each question, you're not just answering a surface level query, you're addressing a deeper concern that they have and that caters to the need of the hiring team, that matters to them. So this becomes the foundation for crafting a truly impactful answer because they can connect with you. So for instance, if they talk about, tell me about a time where you disagreed with a colleague, they're not just probing for a conflict story. What they're really looking to understand is, like, how do you handle difficult situations? What is your communication style? Whether you can navigate through disagreements without damaging any relationship. So a great response would go beyond the disagreement itself as the example scenario, and in general, highlight your ability to resolve conflicts constructively. And you might want to focus more on the general framework for handling disagreements that you deploy. And even taking it up a notch, you can even ask a further specific question like, hey, are there any typical kind of disagreement handling that you're looking to assess? Because a day-to-day disagreement handling would be different from a long-term strategic pivoting, and you have to convince, get the business buy-in. So that gives a further depth into why they are asking the question, and that will help you out. Now, from there, it's also important to understand, like, what are the 4 key elements of a great response. So once you understand why the question is being asked, your next task is to craft that response, not only to address the question, but also keep the interviewer fully engaged. A 10 on 10 response would go beyond just the basics and show that you're thoughtful, strategic, and aligned with what the organization is really looking for. And so here are the 4 key steps. One is interrupt their pattern. You keep them engaged by offering something that is unexpected. So in general, what happens is interviewers hear a lot of standard rehearsed answers, especially from senior candidates. And if your responses are predictable, you risk losing their attention. And if they don't pay attention, of course, they don't listen to what you have to say. So to stand out, you need to interrupt their mental pattern with something unexpected, something that breaks the monotony of a typical interview process. Now, this doesn't mean shocking them with an outrageous answer, but rather offering a fresher perspective, verbiage, or specificity in your response in a way that they weren't anticipating. So, for example, typical generic responses look like, hey, I manage my team by setting clear goals. You could say something more specific and unique to your case, like, hey, I create more of an ownership mindset where everybody feels a little bit more accountable, not just for their task, but like everybody is mapped out to the success of the entire project. And so I make sure that I work with them and constantly keep reminding them. So now what you're doing is you're showing your framework in your own words at a more in your own tonality. And this subtle shift will shift how you frame your answer and make it stand out. And it works great because humans are wired to notice and remember things that break patterns. Now from there, you want to also have a lucid structure. So this is to make your answers easy to follow. So even if your content is great, a response will fall flat if it's not structured well and if it's organized well. So people cannot process it clearly and logically. So it is imperative because interviewers have to process a lot of information in a short amount of time and then remember for that for later and make a decision based on that. So imagine if you're dumping so much information and they can't hold all of that in their head, then the lucidity becomes a very key element in making you more memorable, and the more memorable it gets, the better chance of them making the right kind of decision with you. And feeding into the aspect of making yourself memorable, we come to the third point of keeping your response concise and bite size. So it's easy to get carried away with over explaining, and especially when you're passionate about a particular topic. However, most interviewers only retain 2 to 3 key points from each response. That's pretty much the processing power of human brain. I mean, it's hard to just sit down and listen to the other person talk. So that's why it's critical to keep your answers concise and break them into bite-sized pieces. Right? So if your answers are getting too long, ask yourself if adding this detail is adding any value to it. And if not, just wrap it up. You can always provide more context later if asked. And from there, your responses must also build an emotional connection. So you gotta tell it in a way that the story that resonates. So even though interviews are business decision-making scenarios, whether hiring or otherwise, it is still an emotional process. So storytelling is one of the most effective ways to connect with someone emotionally, because of course the decision for hiring that they make is going to be emotional, and that way you can connect really well with the interviewer. So a good story, what it will do is it will paint a vivid picture and involve emotional stakes. And instead of simply describing what you did, you want to explain how it felt, what challenges you faced, how your actions led to a certain outcome. So quick example could be instead of saying just hey, I led a product launch, you can go a little bit deeper into the feeling of hey, we were under immense pressure to deliver the product in time for a major client demo. And the stakes were high because a competitor was aggressively pushing in the similar solution, and I had to keep my team motivated throughout the time, follow through aggressive deadlines. And when we launched the project successfully, the feeling of accomplishment was incredible because we know we had beaten the odds. And now, so it just connects with the person just a little bit more better. Now that said, let's get into the operational bit of how we make it possible. So step one, whenever you're telling a story, you get to the point first. So once you understand why they're asking the question, get to the point immediately. Don't meander or over-explain it from the start. Start with the main thesis of the answer. So here's what I mean. So imagine they ask you, how do you manage deadlines? You say, prioritization. How do you handle conflicts? Communication. How do you plan for risk? I ask an expert unless I am the expert. Or how do you convince someone? So, well, I focus on their self-interest and apprehension. So if you notice in the examples I just shared, no matter the story behind it, the key point is irreplaceable. And so by you putting your lesson in the story first, it gives a quick summary to the listener. And by offering your key takeaway first, you immediately hook the listener. This works because it shows that you're socially calibrated and that you understand that the interviewers are busy and want the crux of your answer first. And so once they're hooked, then you can draw them into the example and elaboration. Now from there, we come to the step 2, is you tell the story from your point of view. After you have delivered your main point, tell the story that highlights your experience and illustrates your answer. People aren't interested in what happened alone. They are interested in your perception and handling of the problem. So here's how you can keep the interviewer engaged with your storytelling. So number one is paint a picture from your point of view. Describe the scenario as you experienced it. From there, highlight observations and key moments of decisions. Explain your thought process on how you arrived at a particular conclusion. And use present tense as you're describing, as you're narrating the scenario. Use present tense or active voice to draw the listener into the story and make it feel more immediate and draw them in as the protagonist of the story. So for example, here's how I can frame a general example would be so as I'm touring the shop floor with the VP of operations, excited about rolling a new digital logger for our asset management tool, we overhear 2 linemen complaining how frustrating the rollout had been. So the VP turns to me and with a look that clearly said hey, fix this. And at that moment, I knew we had to improve our training methods, making them more interactive and hands-on. So as you notice, by telling the story from my own perspective, and that too in an active voice and in present tense, you make it more vivid and engaging. This brings the interviewer into your experience and allowing them to better understand your thought process and leadership. Again, if you feel like this kind of response is a little bit too detailed, know that I'm only adding detail here at the moment of a critical decision. You wouldn't be adding this level of detail to every part of your response of the story. Now from there, we come to the step 3. And this is really good for those people who have problems keeping it in structure, or they ramble on and speak too much. A clear structure is absolutely critical because the interviewer needs to follow your logic, and it prevents your answer from feeling disjointed. So speaking in bullets is the number one way to organize your thoughts. So for example, you could say like, hey, we approach the problem in two ways. We improve the training process and we streamline the communication. This was because of three reasons, and then you put the reasons behind it. So what happens is like, and the important thing here is, and I'll talk more about it, that there will be 2 to 3 bullets that you'll generally be using. But you structure your answer like this, you make it easier for the listener to process. People can usually remember 2 to 3 key pieces of information at once. So presenting your responses in chunks makes it much more digestible, and it shows the logic or the reasons or like the bulleted structure to your responses. And lastly, and this is something a lot of candidates face and they don't realize it, is using conjunctions to build out a solid argument. So one common problems a lot of candidates face in their responses is it seems somewhat disjointed, especially the candidates for whom English may not be their first language, or they're immigrants in the United States. This makes their responses a little hard to follow even when the content is solid. A simple fix to this is using conjunctions to connect your ideas. And it might seem like a grammar lesson, but like conjunctions are words like and, but, because, however, although. Things like that connect to arguments in a way, in a comparative way, correlative way, whatever that is. Stressing on these conjunctions helps smooth out transitions between thoughts and create a more cohesive argument. So for example, a disjointed argument might sound like, hey, we implemented a new solution. The old system was inefficient. It caused delays in production. We needed to scale up quickly. The new system reduced costs. It improved output. All of the facts are present, but it feels scattered because it does not connect the dots like how the pieces relate to each other. So now just notice how I stress on these conjunctions and how it could improve the flow. So a revised response could be like, so we implemented a new solution because the old system was inefficient, causing delays in the production. Now, since we needed to scale up quickly, the new system was not only reducing cost for us, but also improved our throughput. Now, again, I would say if this seems like a simple grammar lesson, think again, because we are surprised by how many candidates don't even know that their responses lack proper connections and conjunctions. And only when we have them record themselves and listen to themselves speak is when they realize that, oh yeah, it feels disjointed. So are you doing it? Perhaps try recording yourself and you'll find like, hey, how you frame your responses. And lastly, step 5, I would say keep your categories of arguments together. So to make your responses cohesive and easier for the interviewers to follow, it is important to group your related points together. This method ensures that your answer flows logically and keeps your key points organized, helping the interviewer to absorb and remember your response. So here's how you can compartmentalize your thoughts. Typically, there are 4 parts to most responses. The first part is the what, where you discuss all the actions, items of the task that you undertook in one section, or like what was the key charter for that initiative. You explain the why, where the reason or the motivation behind that initiative. There's the how part of it that directly talk about the how you acted or what you did, what happened. And lastly, the result, where you conclude with an outcome, you conclude with an impact, you will conclude with a lesson learned. So by structuring your response this way, you deliver a more compelling and organized answer. Now, responding to a behavioral interview question, let's do a full example. So question could be like, tell me about a time where you had to lead a team through a difficult project. How did you handle it? So the answer could be, let's address the what bit. So last year I was tasked with leading the implementation of a new ERP system, a project that affected multiple departments, and we were facing resistance from several teams, especially in the finance department, who felt the existing system was working just fine and saw no need for change. The primary reason, and now we're talking about the why part, the primary reason for this response was to get our existing ERP system and had become outdated and was no longer capable of supporting the company's growth. We were seeing inefficiencies in reporting and inventory management, which were directly impacting our profitability. And additionally, without an upgrade, we wouldn't be able to scale effectively as the company expanded into new markets. So all of the why is together. Now, putting all of the how together. So to manage the resistance and ensure successful implementation, I took a few key steps. First, I held a series of meetings with each department to listen to their concerns and demonstrate how the new system would improve their process. I also worked closely with our IT team to ensure that the training sessions were tailored to each department's unique needs. So there's not a general training for everyone. There's like very specific training. And then we created a phased rollout so that each team could adjust gradually to the new system while we still maintained our current workload. So lastly, I made sure the communication was smooth, regular, and periodic. And so everyone felt informed and involved throughout the process. So now I have addressed all of the how bit. I come back to the result. So as a result, we completed the ERP implementation 2 weeks ahead of schedule, and the new system introduced our reporting time by 30% and cut down inventory discrepancies by 20%. More importantly, after the initial resistance, the finance department became one of the strongest advocates for the system as they saw the first-hand improved workflow. And so see how in the results I've also implemented the emotional bit of it. Now, of course, and here's a bonus tip, you want to also be able to gracefully handle your mistakes, because no matter how well prepared you are, interviews are dynamic scenarios, and sometimes you will want to pivot or introduce a tangential point, and so it will disrupt the flow of your argument. Now, to do this smoothly, using transition phase like by the way when introducing a related topic, and anyway, so when you want to return to the original point, will massively hurt. So for example, like, by the way, another aspect that we focused on the rollout affected long-term scalability. Anyway, once we addressed that, we were able to move forward in the implementation. So I just like it's by the way is a really good entryway into talking about something somewhat related but not directly related or not fitting into the flow of the argument. And then when you want to depart from that, use the thing anyway. Now, I really do hope that these strategies would help you craft a better interview response. Now, that said, I cannot overstate the importance of like recording yourself in the interviews at least once, because while these things that I just said might seem apparent and you feel like, yeah, this makes sense, I wanted this video to be more of a detailed checklist and a guideline for ensuring that you are able to deploy these things at hand. So I would highly encourage like record the response for yourself and then see how you can incorporate these methods. Hope this helps. All the best.